Hello, students. We've dealt with different functions like len and uh, type and dir and range, and now we're going to learn to make our own functions in Python. So we're going to be defining our own functions. So how do we do something like this? Well, we start off with def to define. Okay, so that's our keyword for defining a function. Next, we give it a name. So let's say we want to, I don't know what's simple, um, double. Let's double something. Okay, now we have to tell it what we want to double. Let's double n. So just like when we're calling a function to try to get an output, when we're defining a function, we also use parentheses. And we tell Python what it's taking in. So this is going to be taking in n. And what's it going to be returning? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the keyword return to tell Python what I want this function to return. And then I just write what I want it to return, 2 times n. So that's what double is going to do. It takes in n and it returns 2 times n. Now you'll notice we had this automatic indentation thing that happened. We've been running a lot of single lines of code. Python uses indentation to sort of organize our blocks of code. And when we define a function, we need to indent to show Python what is in the function before we go back to doing other things. Like maybe we want to double n and then we want to try plugging in 3. So we need Python to know what's part of the function and what isn't, and we use indentation for that. Okay, well, let's hit enter and see if Python understands what we did, and looks good. And now let's try to double something. Let's try to double 3, and perfect, double 3. Now, you'll notice that we did not specify the domain. Right? In math, domains are very important. For instance, you probably don't want to stick a negative number inside a logarithm. But in Python, how do domains work, right? I mean, domains are still important, but how does the domain work? We never specified it. So here's what Python does. Python tries to work with whatever you give it. It's going to try to run the function. So we don't have to specify that, this function takes in an integer. So because of that, if I wanted to double a float, not that I like floats, but if we wanted to double a float, boom, we could double a float. What if we wanted to try to double a list? Why did it do that? Well, because multiplication, when it comes to lists, what it does is it takes 2 copies of the list and it concatenates them. If I multiply by 2, if I multiply by n, it takes n copies of the list and concatenates them. So what Python was doing is, hey, I didn't know you wanted to double an integer. Whatever you give me, I'm going to try to double it. So that means I'm going to take what it is and I'm going to times 2. What happens if I try to do this with a set? Let's see what happens there. And look, I've gotten an error here, and it's a very clear error message. Type error. Oh, it means I must have used the wrong type of object. What type did I use? I used the set. Okay, well, let's see. Unsupported operand type for multiplication with integer and set. That means we don't have a way of multiplying an integer and a set. We have a way of multiplying an integer and a list. 3 times 8, 9. That'll work. It'll just give me 898989. But it really doesn't make sense to do the same thing for sets when sets don't even allow repetition. And this sort of multiplication is going to cause repetition. So we're getting a little off topic into sets and lists, but the important thing here is that you don't have to specify what you want your function to take in. Whatever you want to do, you create a function to do it. And if you give that function the right kind of thing, hopefully it does what is intended if you've written things correctly. Maybe you give Python something else and the function still runs and does something maybe nice, maybe not. Who knows? But Python will try its best to run things. Okay. Now we know that functions in Python can sometimes take more than one variable as well, like len, right? That takes, no, not len, but range. Range can take, right? I mean, it can take one, but if I do range of 4 to 5, well, it's lazy evaluation, so it prepares that range, sets it aside for us. Okay, so what if we want a function that takes in 2 things? How would we do that? Well, just like a function where we call the function with 2 things, which we've seen, like range, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to use parentheses and have two things there. So let's make something. What's the simplest things we could do? Add or subtract? Let's do subtract, but we're just going to, let's just do this. Subtract is not a keyword in Python, which is good, which I don't want to write over anything that already exists, right? If I wanted to call this function len, I could do that. And then I wouldn't be able to use len anymore because I just defined something over it. So we want to not use words that are already in the language. But subtract is fine. Let's do subtract a and b. Oh, yeah. And now we have to decide, do I want it to return a minus b or b minus a? Well, it's whatever psychologically for us makes as much sense. So let's try a minus b. And let's see if this works. Subtract 6 and 4. So boom, 6 and 4. Suppose I just do this. It gives us a very clear error message. It says, hey, type error, our subtract is missing one required positional argument. Okay, why is it calling it a positional argument? Well, the arguments are the things we're putting in, we put into a function. And positional tells us that the position matters. And as you see, the position is going to matter with subtract, right? A and B, it matters which one is A and which one is B because we get this A minus B. So if we create functions like this, Python keeps track of the position, and that's how we are able to let the function know which one is A and which one is B. And this is also why when you ask for range 3, 5, that's not the same thing as range 5, 3, which wouldn't have anything in that range. So Python keeps track of the position, and here it just told me, hey, you're missing one of your arguments. So very nice, very clear. Okay, let's subtract. Let's try this. What if I do 5, 3? Well, same thing, but I gave it two numbers. No, I gave it a list. I gave it a single thing. And Python knows that I need to give it two things, and I only gave it one. So it's giving me a friendly error to tell me what I'm doing wrong here. What if I wanted to subtract 5, 3, and let's try to take 4 from 5, 3. Well, now I've gotten a different error. I have unsupported operand type. Oh, well, 4 minus, so something I can't do with this operator minus here. And what can I do? Well, I can't subtract an int from a list. So it's just telling me that Python doesn't have a way of doing that. So very friendly error message, lets me know exactly what went wrong. But if maybe and as much as I don't like doing it, 5.0 and 3, let's say I make one of these a float, well, Python's okay with that. It's okay with subtracting an integer from a float. It gives me a float as long as there's a float hanging out. It's going to give me a float because it knows we're already using approximations. So even though I might not have made this function to work with floats intentionally, it still works whenever it can. If I give it something it can't deal with, then it does not work. And that's an introduction to functions in Python.